The frost-laden dawn had barely broken when Thomas Hale, widower, father and ranch hand by necessity rather than passion, stepped out of his creaking cabin to begin another day of work that paid too little and demanded too much. The winter air hit him like a slab of ice, stinging his lungs as he inhaled, the breath leaving his mouth in a trembling cloud. He adjusted the wool collar around his neck, glanced back at the small cabin where his 8-year-old son, Eli, still slept, and forced his stiff legs toward the paddock. Life since his wife Clara passed had been a hollow, aching routine, rise before the sun, mend fences, break horses, stretch every dollar, and hope Eli never noticed how scared he truly was. As Thomas trudged into the thinning morning fog, he noticed something strange, a silhouette beside the old oak on the far edge of the field. A horse, saddled yet riderless, dark against the pale frost. That alone was unusual, but something in the scene tugged at Thomas with an uneasy pull. No traveler ever tied a horse to a tree on someone else's land without asking. He squinted through the fog, his boots squelching against half-frozen mud as he approached, the early sun's weak rays glinting off something draped over the horse's saddle. At first, he thought it was a bundle of supplies, a bedroll maybe, the kind left behind when someone camped in a hurry. But when he stepped closer, the sight hit him like a hammer. Nestled atop the saddle was a tiny baby, wrapped snugly in a sky-blue blanket, cheeks flushed from the cold, but the faint rise and fall of breath, proving the child was alive. Thomas froze, the world narrowing to the small, fragile life before him. The infant let out a soft, sleepy whimper, enough to break his paralysis. Heart-pounding, he hurried forward, reaching out with trembling hands as if afraid the slightest touch might shatter the child. That's when he saw it, a note pinned to the saddle horn with a crude wooden clothespin. The paper fluttered weakly in the cold breeze. Thomas plucked it with numb fingers and unfolded it carefully. 5 shaky words stared back at him. "Please save my baby." His stomach dropped. The winter air seemed to thicken around him, the fog too heavy to breathe. He looked around the field, scanning for footprints, movement, anything that might tell him who left the child or why. But the frost was undisturbed except for the horse's hooves. No silhouette in the distance. No desperate mother stepping out from behind a tree. No one. The baby stirred again, a small fist escaping the blanket, and Thomas felt something inside him fracture and shift. Memories assaulted him. Clara's tired but joyful smile as she held newborn Eli. Her hands gentle, her voice a soft lullaby. Then years later, those same hands trembling, her face pale, her breath fading while he held her, unable to save her. The pain surged freshly, like a wound he had never allowed to heal. With slow steps, he moved beside the horse, placing a steadying hand on its flank. The animal was calm, almost eerily so, as though it understood the gravity of the moment. Thomas carefully lifted the baby from the saddle, cradling the tiny body against his chest, feeling the warmth seep into his frozen hands. "Easy now. I got you," he murmured, though whether he was speaking to the baby or himself, he didn't know. The child blinked groggily at him, innocent eyes reflecting nothing but trust. Thomas exhaled shakily, his breath trembling not just from cold, but from a sudden swell of responsibility he had not expected, and was not sure he was ready for. The note crumpled slightly in his fist as his mind raced. Who was Elle? Was the child abandoned or hidden? Was this a desperate escape or something far darker? And what kind of danger might follow? He looked toward the cabin where Eli slept, unaware of how their lives were about to shift. Thomas had barely managed to care for one child alone. Now the fragile weight in his arms threatened to tip the balance of his carefully managed, barely surviving world. But he also knew this. Someone out there believed he was the kind of man who could save a life. Clara had once believed that too. With a shaky breath, he made his decision. Holding the baby tight against his chest, Thomas turned toward home, not noticing the faint crack of a twig in the woods beyond the fog, where a shadow lingered, watching him, before vanishing into the frozen silence. The cabin seemed smaller than ever as Thomas paced across the worn wooden floor, the baby tucked in a blanket-lined basket near the fire, while Eli hovered close, Wide-eyed with wonder and confusion, the crackling flames offered warmth, but not enough to thaw the tension knotting Thomas's chest. After returning from the field, he had fed the infant warm milk with shaking hands, all while Eli peppered him with questions. Whose baby is that? Why was it outside? Are we keeping it? Is someone coming to get it? Thomas didn't have a single answer he was sure of, so he avoided them, focusing instead on keeping the baby alive and easing the growing fear tightening around his ribs. The note weighed heavily in his pocket like a verdict. Please save my baby. Save from what or whom? As the morning stretched into afternoon, Thomas felt the unease grow. Every creak of the porch boards, every distant rustle of wind, every shifting shadow outside the frost-rimmed windows set his nerves on edge. Someone had left that child on purpose, and people didn't make choices like that unless danger nipped at their heels. He tried to distract himself by chopping wood with Eli, but even the rhythmic thud of the axe failed to settle his mind. His thoughts kept circling back to Clara, how she had trusted him with their son, how she had whispered in her final hours. "Promise me you'll protect him. Promise me you won't close your heart," he had promised. But in the years since, he had forgotten how to do anything except survive. Now, with the sudden arrival of another child, he felt himself standing on a knife's edge between the safe misery he had grown used to and the dangerous hope of caring again. Later that day, while Eli napped and the baby slept soundly by the fire, Thomas stepped outside to clear his thoughts. The frost had begun to melt, turning the ground slick, the sky painted in muted shades of gold and grey. He leaned against the porch railing, rubbing a hand over his tired eyes. That's when he noticed it, hoofprints near the tree line. Too fresh to be from that morning, leading away from his property. Someone had been watching. His pulse quickened. He scanned the horizon, but saw nothing except shifting fog and skeletal branches. A whisper of instinct told him the child was not abandoned out of convenience, but desperation. That shadow he thought he sensed earlier had been real, and whoever it was could return. For the first time in years, fear for someone other than Eli struck him with alarming clarity. He hurried inside, bolted the door, and sat near the fire, staring at the infant's sleeping face. The child's tiny fingers twitched, curling into soft fists that reminded Thomas starkly of how small Eli once had been, how fragile, how dependent. He felt something inside him break open, like a frozen river cracking under the first warmth of spring. He couldn't send the child to the orphanage in town. He knew how overcrowded and neglected those places were. And the sheriff? If danger followed this child, reporting it would only put more targets on their backs. No, if someone had trusted him enough to leave this baby here, then he would honor that trust, whether it ruined him or not. As dusk settled, Eli woke and sat beside him, resting his head on Thomas's arm. "Dad," he asked quietly, "are we going to help the baby?" Thomas swallowed hard before answering. "Yeah," he said finally, voice thick with emotion. "We're going to help. We're going to protect him. Whatever it takes." Eli smiled sleepily, leaning closer. In that moment, Thomas felt the decision anchor in his heart like bedrock. He didn't know what danger lurked ahead or who might come searching. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel, purpose. As the fire crackled warmly and the winter wind howled outside, Thomas looked at both children, his son and the stranger, who had become theirs by fate, and vowed silently that he would keep them safe, even if the shadows returned. Unbeknownst to him, far beyond the frost-coated hills, a rider moved swiftly through the dark, a cloak whipping in the wind, carrying secrets that would soon collide with Thomas Hale's quiet world. But in that small cabin, lit by flickering firelight and the fragile hope of a new beginning, Thomas stood resolute, no longer just a single father trying to survive, but a protector ready to fight for the family destiny had rebuilt around him.